Alright, another DraftScience video presentation. The double slit experiment again. Ken Wheeler video. I guess we'll play that at the end just to point out, he titled it big. Dual slit experiment explained. Doesn't explain anything. It doesn't even come close to touching the evidence. What has to be explained? Nothing. Just says, more of his, it's whatever, pressure mediation moving through an ether thing. Again, if you don't call it an ether, if you call it fields or something, you've trespassed against the Holy Lord. It's just a Muslim arguing with a Christian, or a Christian arguing with a Muslim about how silly their religion is. That's how silly Ken Wheeler is. And it's just so tragic that he gets encouragement from the masses, talking this babble. And it's, just a humiliation to the human race that, the human intelligence isn't capable of seeing what Ken Wheeler is, which is he's a used camera salesman. It's probably worse than a used car salesman. Oh, this camera's never been anywhere. No. It's never underwater. It was never, yeah, sure it wasn't. Okay, anyway. Let's go down the lists. So we'll do the physics first, and then we'll do the, oh, crap. They actually believe this crap. So there's a bunch of experiments actually that you have to explain. So we'll do the double slit first. So you got this idea of two slits are open, and you get a pattern, and the pattern is a little bit complicated. It has bits, and then it has bits, and then it has bits. Okay, so it's complicated. There's two patterns in the pattern. That's the double slit. Now, you can make these slits really small and kill part of that, or you can make this impediment really small. And by really small, I mean really small. So small you couldn't barely see that there's a wire there. And you can change that. But otherwise, it's just a version of this. There could be 8 of these, there could be 11, there could be 13 in each grouping. Just changes based on the width of the slits. So that's one experiment you have to explain. Now, that has nothing to do with Thomas Young. Thomas Young didn't realize there was these multiple patterns or any of that stuff. So it's really not the Young double slit experiment. That's not really the reality. Alright, well then you have the single slit. Alright, and that creates a pattern that doesn't have the complexity, so it just does a very bright here in the center. They're very bright, and then they get less bright, but they're as clear. Lots of pattern. Could be 100 of these little bars. They usually look like bars. Let's point that out too. They don't look like what they're supposed to look like, which is gradually on and gradually off. They're supposed to look like a very three-dimensional, gradually on, gradually off pattern, which they don't look like by their mathematics. Okay, their mathematics says this should be all very gradual, and it looks like a bunch of hard little bars of light. Okay, but anyway, it's basically just on, off, repeated pattern, and it just diminishes at the ends. Alright, single impediment. Okay, same pattern pretty much, except it's not bright anymore, because obviously you block the light in the middle. So it's just a nice little pattern. It goes from a little bit brighter to less bright. Then you have this thing called a Lloyd's experiment, or something like that anyway. And with that, and you're doing in that experiment, you reflect light off of a surface and send it straight. So it's the reflected interference pattern. Alright, kind of a weird little concept, but you also get a pattern, and the pattern is even more crude in the sense that it's just these bars of light, pretty much. Alright, and then you have the two-source experiment you can do with like radar or radio waves, where you just create two sources that have the same phase signal. You send the same signal, and you shoot it onto a target, and you get bars again. Okay, you don't get the double slit pattern though. So even though there's two sources, no double slit pattern, no complex pattern, you just get the simple on and off pattern. And with two sources, you think it would duplicate the double slit, but no, the pattern is the single slit pattern. So that's sort of a giveaway. You know, that the pattern, I guess I could just imagine this is over here. yeah, okay. So it's the same pattern as the double slit. I mean the single slit, not a complex pattern. All right. And so that's a giveaway. Now you can do this experiment with electrons, and I could add that, but frankly the electron experiments are sort of fake. You know, they're not really. See, this is supposed to be about just random sources, just, you know, throwing light at things. The whole idea is you have to have a randomized source, but you can't know what slit it goes through and all those kind of rules. And with electrons, there's nothing random about it. And what they're basically doing is just setting it up so the electron beam is focused, and it's focused to go right through the slits. And then the electrons hit each other, and then they make a pattern. So it's really just banging electrons into electrons. Well, you can't see that when I grew down there, but anyway, it's not completely integral to the argument. So those are all the experiments you have to really, if you're going to explain what the double slit experiment is, you really have to be able to explain all these other experiments and why they are different and why the differences exist. Now, I've gone over quite a bit of that. One of the key things is to understand they're just sources. Okay, so if you see an impediment, you know, a surface, then you just think of that as a source, and another source, and another source, and another source. So this is the 4-source experiment. This is the 2-source experiment. This is the 2-source experiment. This, you know, it's obviously you can't say it's a 2-source experiment, right? But you kind of know the photon didn't go both here and here. You kind of know it. Same photon didn't do that, so it has to be, you know, 2 sources. But you know, there is a difference. So I don't know what category we'll put it in. We'll put it in the 2-source with a conditional. Obviously, this is the 2-source experiment. All right, even though it looks like the 2-slit experiment, but there's no extra sources. The surfaces don't matter in this experiment. They're not causing any effect. All right, the other thing to understand is that this is a pattern, okay, and light has a pattern, you know, and that's all you're trying to understand is pattern in, pattern out. So, yeah, so we'll get to what a photon is. I mean, I can't keep both things here, so you got that, right? There's different experiments with different outcomes, and the different outcomes are based on a theory of what could possibly be happening. So if I have a single slit, and I make the argument that when the light goes past it, the only light that's affected is the light that goes next to the surface. And that's verified by the single slit because a whole bunch of light ends up hitting the target here in the middle. Very, 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 very bright. Like 80–90% of the light goes right here, straight to the middle. And only a tiny percentage goes to the fringes. And so the simple argument is that photons go in, they are disturbed by hitting the surface. Photons are rather large, in spite of what people think. A photon is a frequency, a distance between objects, and the frequency itself has a pattern built in the sense that it has polarization, which means it takes up space this way. And so this is proportional to this. Okay, the wavelength and the frequency are proportional to each other. So photons are rather large in terms of the spacing between the object we call a photon. So a photon is an object in the sense it's made up of components. It's a composite object. All right, and when it goes through, little bits of it are shot here. This one will go that way, this one will go that way, this one might go that way. And the simple truth is when you throw the pieces at the wall, there's a 50-50 chance, okay, 50%, 50%, of whether you'll put them back in the right frequency. See, 50% will be almost in the right frequency, and 50% will be clearly not in the right frequency. So, you know, those two extremes, there'll be just a fluctuation whether you can be in frequency, you know, back in phase or out of phase. And you can think of it as a wave, but there's just absolutely no reason to do that. It's clearly quanta, it's clearly quantizable, And all you're really saying is did I hit the surface in an area, a surface of atoms, did I hit them and then hit them again at just the right timing? And if I do that, it's called a photon. It causes an electrical effect. And if I don't hit them at the right timing, I hit them too soon or too slow, then it's not a photon. And if you understand that's what's happening, you can explain all of this, because there's pieces going everywhere. So every photon that goes through, it sends pieces, it scatters off the surfaces. And scatters a well-known phenomenon. Photons scatter off of electrons. When photons hit an atom or hit a plasma or different things, they'll deflect off of the electrons. They'll hit the electrons, electrons move, then the photon is readmitted in a new direction, essentially. But it's a common occurrence. So if you understand it that way, you can understand this. So then we go to the single impediment. You can sort of understand that it's really just the same thing. It's just two surfaces. And now instead you blocked most of the light. So 90% of the light got blocked in this case. So you have no bright spot here. But what you will have is a bunch of scatter off of these surfaces again. And so you'll end up with the pattern of where you just reconstruct a photon. Okay, so you break the pieces off, you throw them against the wall, and in certain locations they match, in other locations they don't. So you can think of it just heads and tails, right? The photon goes near the surface, and then it gets flipped to a head or a tail on a coin, right? You could just understand that all you're doing is figuring out, well, where did two tails hit? Where did two heads hit? That's all you're saying. Where does it match? Where does it not match? Where does it match? Where does it not match? So you're just throwing the quarters at a wall, the pennies, and you can understand that if you threw enough of them, there would be two pennies that hit the same spot, and they'd be heads, heads, or there'd be two that hit tails, tails, and then there would be heads, tails. And you got a 50-50 chance of getting those two arrangements. So that explains why the single and the single slit and the single impediment, and explains why the patterns look the way they do. And I've explained the double slit, and then when you understand this, the others, the radio and radar experiments, you can understand them just by simple geometry of jamming. So when you have two sources and you broadcast them, okay, to the surface, there's no interference necessary as a concept. You don't need to have these things interfere with each other until they reach the surface. And the fact is, if they did the experiment where they put a detector on the surface or at a distance, 2 meters away from the radar dishes, and they just had it so it was a directional antenna, that is, it only could accept radiation based on a direction, so that way they could eliminate the other source, they would see they can receive this. So this is a spot where they're getting no signal. Well, if they use a directional antenna, they'll get a signal, and if they turn the antenna this way, they'll get a signal. So there was no interference here in space at all. Clearly, whatever's happening is happening right on the surface. I mean, it certainly does prove that point. And also in this experiment, you have no slits, right? So how can you, if you don't have slits, how can you create the wave functions, that are supposed to be doing the interfering? This experiment in radar or in radio is essentially the same as me shooting two laser beams into each other. And we know that doesn't work. I can't make the laser beam hit the other laser beam and cause light to change its direction. So we know I can't cancel laser beams. I can't destructively interfere. So, it's just, this experiment just illustrates it. And like I said, the jamming geometry, the geometry for, in radio, if I have two sources of radio and I put the two signals out of phase, I can't receive either one. So both are broadcasting the radio, and I'm close enough to receive them, but unless I turn one of them off, I can't receive the other one. If I turn this one off, then I can receive this one. If I turn this one off, I can receive this one. But I can't receive them both at the same time because they're coming in at a combined frequency. See, when they're by themselves, they look like this, and you could argue like this. But if I combine them at the same time, you can see they create a new frequency, and the receiver can't see the new frequency. It certainly can't see it as a composite of these two frequencies. So when they're lined up, it can. So when I put them in phase, you know, the frequencies are the same, I just see, oh yeah, I can see that. And if they have the same signal on them, well, I'll get the music will come in perfectly. If they're playing this, if they're carrying the same exact musical signal, I'll pick up both of them. I'll pick them up just fine. So this experiment gives a lot away. It explains a lot of stuff because it makes it impossible to believe certain wacky theories about waves and interference, because it just doesn't work as an explanation. Now the mirror thing, you know, this is a little more complicated, but obviously it has to be more than one photon. You can't have the one photon theory wouldn't work, because obviously the one photon goes here and that's it. So there has to be more than one photon for there to be a reflection and it comes up. Well, again, it's the same theory of jamming, where you have the photons in phase, you'll get a reconstruction. Where it's out of phase, there can't be a photon. Similar description. So what else is there? So that's about it. I mean, I don't really have to go through a whole bunch of stuff, but you know, the key experiments that give it away, again, is the single impediment. Like Ken says, he does the double slit with the single. You can't do the double slit pattern, so he's just explaining the single slit, you know, pattern. He can't argue that the single needle creates the double slit pattern, because it doesn't. They're very different patterns, and that just shows how ignorant Ken is. He argues as if he's a professional at this deduction and retroduction and this philosophy of science thing, and he's done it so unprofessionally. It's just so glaring. But anyway, it does the single slit and the single impediment just demonstrate quite clearly that this isn't about what every photon does. This is just about what these ones that go near the surface do. That's it. That's the key ingredient. The thing that makes the single impediment and the single slit similar, or you know, that causes their key feature, is that you can understand that 90% of the light goes here in this experiment, and there is no 90% here. Nothing. And so all of it's being created right here on the surfaces. That's the only light that matters. It's the light that gets interfered with by the electrons on the surface, and it scatters. And that's a perfectly valid works explanation. No duality, no blah blah blah, perturbations, hyperboloids, no nonsense needed. So obviously my explanation is quite different than the conventional one. They're wrong. Ken is just wronger. Okay, so it's just wrong. It's bad physics arguing with bad physics. And again, I've offered Ken Wheeler $2,000 to argue my physics, just to play, just even what I just demonstrated right here on this board, to show people what the facts are, what the real experiments are. And he declines to defend his physics against the rational argument, not the irrational one created by the other religion, okay, of conventional physics. And it's just a religion. I mean, their whole you know, quantum woo, that is their entanglement interference notions, are just wrong. So that's the irony here. Ken Wheeler believes in interference. Now he's saying it somehow happens at the source. He doesn't explain that, but he says it's the locus, he calls it. The locus does it. I don't know exactly how the photon can already be interfered with while it's going through the slits or around the slit. How does it know it's, but oh, I'm already interfered with? So there's no explanation of any of that. So we'll just play some of this to just demonstrate. He doesn't explain anything. He doesn't even talk realistically in any realistic way about the actual experiment.
Yay! How are you doing there? You know, everybody keeps asking me.
I downloaded the video because the commercials he put in his video are just obnoxious. I mean, every 3 minutes, just terrible. And again, I offered him $2,000. He could just take a big chunk of those commercials out of his videos with that $2,000. but he won't do it. He won't let me talk for 17 minutes for $2,000.
The dual slit experiment. So what about the dual slit experiment? Let's have a in-depth, even though I've made probably, I think I've made 2 videos over the years on the dual slit experiment.
Oh yeah, only 2. Yeah, surprising. It's actually a little more than that. Yeah, where you mention it. But again, yes, and you have explained nothing. So let's just understand. He has said nothing. He puts his dual slit experiment explained in capital letters, and he's explained nothing.
Let's really nail it to the wall on the.
I mean, just amazing, and people fall for this. They reward somebody who just. This is a pathetic, underdeveloped, childish drivel that he argues as physics. It's just so disgusting. I mean, all of his subscribers should be beaten. I mean, they should really be beaten for supporting this horror, this awful demonstration of human. Again, it's just such an insult to human intelligence for somebody to argue that they're explaining something when they came nowhere even close to the subject. I don't know what to say. I mean, this is like saying, I'm going to explain why, women get battered. Lesbian women are bitches. I mean, it's just, no, he didn't even say that. It's like he said, because fish are slimy. I mean, his explanation is so vacuous and disconnected from any of the experiments, from any of the real facts. It's just terrible that he gets away with this crime against the dignity of our pursuit of knowledge. It's an obscenity against reason and logic, facts, the truth. They're all being raped by this tub of crap.
Dual slit experiment. Yeah. And we'll actually have to talk about the things that people don't understand, and then we'll explain. I promise you, I'll give you the explanation.
Okay, you heard I promise you, there is no explanation in this video. None. There's just this vacuous crap. Wave in what? There's no waves. Waves don't move. This doesn't happen. Blah, blah, blah. Has nothing to do with a single fact that has to be explained. Doesn't understand the patterns created. Doesn't understand the distinction in the way you perform the experiment. None of it. Absolutely no facts in his presentation of the explanation.
What light is, and they have absolutely no idea what light is.
You don't have to know what something is to know what it can do. So before we labeled ringworm or something, I mean, you have a condition, you have a disease, you figure out ways to treat it. You don't have to know what the fuck it is until, So this is more of his nonsense, that we have to fully and completely have to understand what it is to be able to describe what it does and understand certain explanations don't work. And certain explanations do work. So that's what we're trying to figure out. Is it a bacteria? Is it a virus? There's ways you can tell the difference because, bacteria causes usually, they'll cause infection in the traditional way where you'll get a fever and you'll have certain symptoms. There's giveaways that allow you to make these distinctions between things.
If you don't know me at all and you're just tuning in, you haven't seen one of my 6,500 videos, I can actually say I'm an expert on field theory.
So it's more bullshit. Well, you can say it, but there's absolutely no evidence that you have a single rational, coherent, consistent with the evidence notion of any of the theory. None of it. You can't describe the actual experiments. If you can't do that, you can't be understanding what happens. Ugh.
Flames are flickering, but let's get to explaining the.
Okay, so flames are so this is where this part is he's sitting there making these rational waves aren't real. Well, flames wave, but those aren't really waves.
Here we actually have, this would be flickering, right? Waves of flames, right? Waves of what? Flame.
Yeah, so obviously they're not waves of flames. They're actually from the convection. It's the chemical reaction is taking place in the air. Yeah. But let's keep going.
Class of double.
You think he loves plasma. You think he would just say that's a plasma.
Path experiments in which, here it comes, in which a wave of what?
So again, this is the funny part, right? Because he believes in this idea of waves in the sense that he thinks light is like sound. And obviously waves work as an idea of understanding. It's a compression of the atoms in the atmosphere that causes sound. A compression of what he would call the medium. So clearly he has to use waves, and yet he's not going to use them in the light experiment. He says the locus of the pattern is the opening, the surface. It didn't interfere in space like all the other people believe. No, somehow the interference happened right at the source, which doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, there's just no way to draw that.
A wave is split into two separate waves. Waves of what? That later combine.
So again, and if I answered ether, then what would you say? Waves in the ether. Apparently he doesn't think there are waves in the ether. So how can you make you can't make anything out of this at all. He believes in waves. He knows Tesla did. So why is he arguing with the wave theory when the wave theory of the double slit is exactly the same as the sound theory for the double slit? See, sounds can cancel each other out in space. The compressions moving through will go through the space. They'll hit each other, and the compressions will cancel if they're opposite, and they'll double if they're not. So that works for sound. I mean, I guess I could have drawn the sound as a comparison, but I mean, sound is completely different. Water waves are completely different than what light's doing. The patterns are being created by a completely different process.
Into a single wave.
I understand it's the simplest pattern I could make in the universe. On, off, on, off, on, off. I mean, you can't get any simpler as a pattern. Lots of things are going to create that pattern in different ways.
Of what? This is part of their explanation of the dual slit experiment.
And your explanation doesn't contain even anything I can laugh at because you don't say anything relevant to the dual slit experiment. There's nothing here.
Needle, not the eye of a needle, which would technically be a dual slit.
Right. So again, he's arguing that he's creating the double slit pattern with a single impediment. And obviously you're creating the single slit pattern. So he doesn't even understand that the single slit and the double slit create distinctively different patterns. He doesn't even understand that. You don't need that.
You actually get the same interference pattern.
So again, you don't. So he actually can't get simple facts right. So he's going to pretend to be the authority on the subject, and he hasn't even gotten the basic fact right that the double slit pattern is overtly and obviously and entirely different than the single slit. It has character and features. It's the difference between a bicycle and a car.
Shaft of a needle. And there's a reason for explaining the dual slit experiment if you understand what light is.
See, so he doesn't even understand the distinction between the two patterns, and he's going to tell us what light is. And he doesn't. It's a coaxial cable, blah, 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 blah.
Had an ice cube and it was melting because it was hot. It's like, well, the ice cube got canceled out by the water. It's like, no, the ice cube melted and it turned into water. An unintelligent person would make that baseless conclusion. Let's first...
So just completely disconnected. You can see that this. What could that possibly have to do with the double slit experiment? Ice melting.
Explain some of the things that I've explained many, many times before we get the actual explanation.
All right, so, there is no actual explanation, so he's just rambling on, and then he brings up the ferrocell and blah, blah, blah.
Well, not Faraday didn't say that because the electron was before his time. Even the discovery...
All right, so he doesn't believe in electrons. He doesn't believe in any of, things that are pretty well established as having actual... dissectable function. So, if there's no electron, then there's no proton, then there's no charge, then there's, you really, you're supposed to be an expert on magnetism. Really can't be magnetism without charge. So this whole thing is just such a pile of crap. Horrible crap.
Light's not an emission. Light does not have a speed. Sound is not an emission.
Right. We know it does have a consistent speed dependent on, yes, you can put it through an obstacle course, and now you can slow it down in the sense that you're going to force it to travel a longer path because it's going to interact with the matter. But you haven't demonstrated in any way that it ever slowed down. And he argues here about Tesla said, how can a small candle create light at the same speed as the burning sun? And, as if it needs to. So, I mean, even Tesla didn't understand that the photon is trapped inside the atoms, that they're the ones that contain energy and contain movement, and their capacity to move quickly is what's going to create another photon. Every time an electron moves, it's even by their own theory, if they believed in an ether, they would have to understand that every time an electron moved, it would be pushing on the ether.
Either. I'm not emitting anything when I make sound. What I'm doing is I'm creating a disturbance.
So again, there's just no point in saying you're not emitting anything. It just doesn't, it doesn't mean anything, because we know we can follow the energy, just like we can follow a water wave. We can follow the compression, okay? The compression is in this direction because water is uncompressible. It can't get where it's going because it's making too much pressure. It goes in the only direction that there's less pressure, which is up, and then it goes up into gravity, and then gravity pushes it back down again. And then it can't go that way because there's more pressure, so it keeps trying to go this way, and it goes a little bit more this way, and then it gets pushed up again, and then it comes down, and it goes a little bit more this way and gets pushed up again and goes down. That's what it's doing.
The medium that's called air. Yeah?
All right. Yeah. So again, everything has to be reverted back to this human-centric, silly notions that because we're swimming in air, everything in the universe is swimming in air. It's just so the earmarks of a religious perspective.
That light has a perspective. At the locus of the dual slit, that is where it's actually manifesting.
So he just said, so he doesn't believe in wave interference. He believes in some other kind of interference. Somehow it interfered inside the slit, and the slit decided which way the photon was going to go. Now, he doesn't believe in straight lines, so I don't even know what he means. The light curves, or how's that, But there's no way you can make any sense out of that. I mean, it's so much less sensible than the conventional wave theory. At least you have some point where you can sort of understand, oh, okay, it has a piece going this way and it has a piece going that way, and the two pieces hit each other. But without the two pieces, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Since light is not an emission and light is not traveling, that means...
All right, so he's like saying a wave isn't traveling, when clearly the pressure does travel. Now, not the same atoms aren't traveling, but the same atoms are recreating the pattern, and they recreate the pattern as it travels along. So it's just silly to say it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that, because it obviously does. We can watch it doing it.
Light at the dual, where the phenomena occurs, mutual cancellation and the interference pattern. From the perspective...
All right, so he'll never draw that, because there's just no way to draw a single slit and then explain where it cancels and where it decides it didn't cancel. There's just no way to draw any interference inside the slit. If somebody could come up with a rational way to draw that, they would have probably taken that as an explanation. But they can't. It's irrational babble. All right, so it's, at 13 he says something fairly stupid, so we'll go there. And then at 14 he says something pretty fucking stupid. It's just terrible.
Full constructive and destructive interference.
So at the source. So somehow it doesn't happen in the space. It happens, where the traditional waves are drawn overlapping each other and interfering. He's saying the interference somehow happens at the source without the interfering waves. How does it do that, Ken?
At the point of origin, because the point of origin is not over here, because that's what every scientist believes.
No, that's not what they believe either. So that's kind of silly, right? They're saying here's the target, here's the source, right? They're saying the interference happens in the space here. They're not saying it happens here. They're saying it happens in the space. You're saying somehow it happened in here. How did it do that? How did the single photon first go through both slits, and then how did it know I'm supposed to interfere or I'm supposed to not interfere?
We emit light here, and there's this strange thing that happens over here right after the dual slit. The point of origin is at the locus of the dual slit. It's not
The locus of the dual slit. I mean, whatever. At the slit, you're saying, yes. But there's no explanation. All right. So just completely stated as if it's a fact without any information to make it a fact. So he goes on.
implies something is moving. Of course, it doesn't matter. We're talking about a conventional broadcast because radio is also light. It's just invisible light. X-ray, gamma.
Well, technically, they're all invisible. Okay, we only see light because it terminates in an eyeball that we're detecting. But yes, if we could just turn the frequency dial and tune in lower frequencies and see them. So yes, we've made cameras and devices that can see a much wider range of radiation. So we can see with radio waves. It's just that the image is kind of blurry.
Radio, visible
We can even see with sound.
light. All of that, of course, is just light, or EMR, the coaxial circuit that is light. Explaining the dual slit experiment.
So again, it just doesn't mean anything to say EMR. What does that mean? What are you talking about? What is this wave in, and how is it confined? We sort of do know that photons aren't going everywhere. Right next to me there may be no photons coming from a star out in space. Right here, no photon hit. No photon here. But yeah, one's over here, and then one's here and hits my eye. We know photons don't come as continuous waves and land on every location evenly. That isn't what they do, Ken. I mean, there's a ton of experiments demonstrating that's not what they do, Ken. That's not how they hit a piece of photographic film. You don't hit it by putting a line across it. It doesn't happen that way, Ken.
It's incredibly easy. But you have to start out with the correct suppositions about what light is.
You have to start off with the supposition that detectives shouldn't just walk in and pick up the phone and call their wife and I don't know, drop their own, light their cigarettes, drop matches on the floor, and pay absolutely no attention to the evidence and just start talking about, I don't like butlers, and butlers always do it, so why don't we just forget about doing this whole investigating thing, just arrest the butler. Oh, there's no butlers? This is just so bad as a way of investigating the truth. He's such a... It's not even Clouseauian detective work. It's so bad. He's not funny.
And no scientist on Earth, and I say that, boldly, no scientist on Earth knows what light is.
And you don't know what light is. So again, you've all got wrong answers. It's true. You're all a bunch of silly religious people. And the evolution solution is right here. It's easy to see. It's, pretty easy to deduce out of the facts. If you just put the facts on the board, you'll kind of get the idea that, oh yeah, that eliminates that, and that eliminates that, and what else could it be? Oh, scatter. Yeah, that works.
They make endless suppositions about light. A light bulb doesn't emit light.
Yes, they have silly snakes in their little fake hell, and you have with the little flames of hell and the little demons, pulling the bellows of the flames of hell, and you have both silly stories of reality.
Any more than you emit sound. You don't emit sound, you create a disturbance.
So, same difference, You create a disturbance that travels. That's pretty much good enough as an explanation of an emission, but whatever. Play your little silly game. I mean, it's just silly. Word games.
Said this about light. He said specifically, Walter Russell did.
So first he quoted Tesla. It's just, it's the same as sound moving through a medium, and then he quotes another religious kook, right? Tesla was pretty much a religious kook. Thought he was, somehow spiritually connected to lightning because there was a lightning storm on the day he was born, and blah, 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 blah. A bunch of mysticism, a bunch of spirituality bullshit.
that light is not an emission. Light does not travel. And he's correct. Light.
There's just no point in saying it doesn't travel, so why say it? You want to say it's like dominoes. Okay, the dominoes don't move, but the falling does. The process of falling moves. Who cares?
It does not travel at all.
The only thing that matters is that at the end there's a domino that hits something. The bell. It falls on the mousetrap, and the mousetrap goes off. Who cares what the process in between is? We know that it's straight lines of dominoes. We know lots of rules that affect it, that it's narrowed by. Anyway, there's no, there's no really point, right? There's no point in reasoning with the human race. I mean, his explanation is unreasonable gibberish. It's just, it's this horrible semantics nonsense. Let's just play with words and pretend we can change their definition to suit our religion.
Well, it has a speed. It's not a speed, it's a rate of induction. Well, what's the difference?
Absolutely nothing.
Well, the devil is in the detail.
Yeah, well, you don't have any details.
All human beings on Earth think that if something has a speed, then something is moving. Something is...
Yeah, duh. And with good reason. Yeah, because that's how things affect them. The tsunami, they really don't care. It's not really water moving towards us. It's just big pile of water that will hit us.
Being emitted. Well, no, it's not. Oh, yeah, Nikola Tesla said, light is nothing more than a sound wave in the ether. There we go. Nikola Tesla. Light can be nothing.
Yeah, so he admitted before that Tesla didn't say much. He only said two things on the subject of light. So, yeah. So one minute he admits that, how could you be smarter than Tesla? Yet Tesla only said two things. And, he didn't prove those two things with any diagrams either.
Nothing more than a sound wave in the ether.
Well, it obviously is more. I mean, you can do the experiments to pull it out, because sound doesn't make double slit. Doesn't make double slit patterns. Doesn't do certain things, and that's a giveaway.
And just like sound, which is not an emission and does not have a speed, that's the rate of induction. There are the Doppler effect, and of course, sound changes speeds or inductions depending on air density, elevation, whether it's really cold outside or real.
So again, this is, I'll just argue that this is okay. This is what humans like to do. Everything to them is whatever they can make it look like or seem like, and it's very superficial. So if it, like I said, platypuses are really, foul. Okay, they're really avian, They're not mammals, and they're not marsupial. No, they're some kind of bird, because that's the way we have to see it, right? Because we're not smart enough to figure out, sometimes things can look the same and be completely different. You got moths that look like, well, there's so many examples. There's, you have wasps that look like ants. You have spiders that look just like an ant. Okay, it's really a spider, but it looks just like an ant, right? But we're not smart enough to figure that out. Yeah, we are smart enough, and the unfortunate truth is, though, is that people want somebody to give them mushy answers, quickly. They don't want to do the thinking work. They don't want to do the work for themselves. So they just pick something that seems, for whatever reason, I really don't understand this common man appeal, but you can always say that most humans are, below average in some way, and so I guess most, at least half the humans are below average, right? And then there's some that are just marginally average, and so I guess they just gravitate to the lowest common denominator as a hero. They really don't admire things better than them. They admire things that are like them. I don't know. It's hard to, I guess it really just comes down to the Ken implies mysticness in the function of the universe, and I guess that's what attracts people, is they like the notion of a potentially mystical world.
Really hot outside because the density of the air changes the rate of induction, just as light changes when it passes. It doesn't pass, it's not an emission, but we say pass because that's what he...
So again, it just keeps tripping over all these semantic technicalities that really just don't make any difference. You can describe the effect as, when it interferes with the surface, you could say, or something like that. You don't have to make this all that complicated.
Human beings do. We use conventional parlance when light passes through.
Yeah, and you keep telling us we're not allowed to do that. So it's okay for you to do it, conventional parlance, but everybody else can't. They have to use your parlance. I have to say coaxial perturbation, in the ether or something. I mean, I'm not allowed to say something else because it's written in your Bible.
The field disturbance passes through more accurately through glass or water. So everybody says, light is a constant. Light's not a constant. The rate of induction changes when it meets water or glass, on and on and on.
Yeah, and the fact is that can be explained, and you're just saying, I don't care if you have an explanation for that. I believe this is what it's happening. Why it's happening is because light is being, there are no atoms, there is no material world, there's just ether and a thick ether, the light travels slower or some sort of nonsense. And you'll ignore the fact that obviously something very different happens to different light going through mediums, and that's why you have a prism. But whatever.
Why do you think lenses have a refractive index? Why do you think that?
Because they're made out of atoms, and they're transparent, which means they're coherently arranged in the sense that they allow the energy to travel from one surface to the other surface without being destroyed.
Light is not a constant. Anyway.
It is constant in space, so again, it is a constant. Now, you can say there's lots of things you could argue are a constant until you change the constant. The speed of sound is a constant in atmosphere, in what is considered average atmosphere even. It's still going to be a constant in terms of its placement in an equation. Its function is going to be that of a constant.
Okay. Explaining the dual slit experiment is incredibly easy, but you have to understand what...
It's just too bad you can't do it. You've made another video boldly claiming you explained something, and you explained absolutely nothing. You drew nothing, you modeled nothing, you explained nothing, you said nothing of any kind of meaningful explanatory value. It happens at the source. Well, how do these different things happen at the source?
Light is. And I do say it boldly and truly and accurately. Not a single scientist on this earth knows what...
Yes, the Christians are full of shit, but you Muslims are also just full of shit. It's frankly shittier shit. Very much shittier.
Light is. They don't. They all think it's a wave particle duality, emission, speed.
Yes, because they have to deal with some of the actual evidence. I mean, obviously, Richard Feynman didn't have a clue about a lot of the evidence, and lots of them didn't have much understanding of the experiments and how they were conducted. So they just say shit, and it doesn't mean much because they really don't know how the experiment was conducted. But again, that's just Christian arguing with Muslim. You're just as clueless. You don't care about the truth, because if you did, you would be curious how these different experiments produce different results. You would understand that that's where you go to find out why it happens, is you see where else it happens and how it happens, and then you'll understand.
And none of those things are true. None of those things are true.
Yes, well, the same could be said. None of the things you have said are true. I would bet my life on it. Yes, you could. Fine. If Ken Wheeler's right, yes, go ahead. Take a knife and split me wide open and spill my guts out, because there's just no chance it's right. No chance this silly, vacuous mush has anything to do with reality.
True. And how sure am I of that? I'll stake my life on it.
Yeah, you won't even bet $2,000 on it. You're such a coward. So again, is staking his life on it. Let's do that for real somehow. Let's have a real physics duel. Okay, you present your argument to the human race, I present mine on equal podium, and we'll see if human beings are really as dumb as you think they are. Really as foul and stinking and stupid and religious and silly and science hating and fact hating as you think they are. I mean, you got a 50-50 chance of being able to snooker them, I might argue, because yes, humans suck. But I tend to think that as long as we have let's at least say, well, let's make sure the judges, the people on the jury, have something more than a 60 IQ. Maybe a 70, okay? Just giving us some hope that they're not going to be as dumb as they possibly can be, you know.
Nikola Tesla said as much, but maybe you think you're smarter than Nikola Tesla.
I think I know better than Nikola Tesla. Like, if give me $1 million and I'll show you, I'll do something amazing with the money. Okay, where Nikola Tesla just burned holes in the ground.
You're not. But I was taught the same garbage growing up, but I knew it was wrong because it didn't explain the phenomena of light.
Well, again, it explained it a hell of a lot better than you just did. I mean, so much better. I mean, the silly young drawing with the two waves is wrong, but it's a hell of a better explanation than the nothing you provided.
You can't explain light as an emission, a wave particle. The notion of a duality in nature is antithetical.
So just understand that when sound does this interference thing, the real interference actually does happen. Okay, it's not broken and then reconstructed as I'm arguing with photons. Sound, it really does interfere. The actual lumps, the compressions in space do as waves interfere with each other. So he just pointed out how Tesla says it's just like sound, and yet Ken is saying no, it's not. Because there are no waves that interfere with each other. It happens at the source. Well, sound, the interference doesn't happen at the source. Ken, it can't possibly happen at the source because it takes time for one wave to get to the other wave. So you're just absolutely contradicting your own Bible. Your own Bible says you must love the Lord. The Lord is the locus. Blah, 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 blah. And now you're saying Tesla was right. Well, Tesla must be wrong because Tesla didn't think it happens at the source.
The common sense, facts, logic, and wisdom. Mother Nature does not does not have a duality.
So again, there is no Mother Nature, so we're just trying to describe the physics of the universe. And clearly he thinks the physics is much more complicated and wooey and got much more moving parts in it than just bumping particles. Well, yeah, that's all there is. There's just movement in the universe, and the movement moves. And that's it. There's nothing else happening here.
In her card deck, implying an inherent contradiction. Mother Nature has a dual nature. There's a paradox.
Yeah, whatever. So again, he's just one religious kook arguing with the other religious kooks. Yes, they're silly to say there's any kind of duality. That's silly. Yes, I agree. But you're just as silly. And you're just as contradictory. One minute you say it's waves, the next minute you say, no, it happens at the locus. There are no waves. Waves in what?
There's a duality. It's not. The duality is in the minds of stupid human beings that don't understand Mother Nature.
I don't think they even have any understanding of the duality, so I don't think they have that in their mind, frankly, because they don't use it all at the same time. They don't have a duality in any individual experiment. They just do it one way. When there's one experiment, they look at it one way, and when it's in another experiment, they look at it another way. But they never look at the two ways at the same time.
Any stupid human being would collectively think that Mother Nature has dualities. It's just because they don't understand it.
No, they wouldn't, I don't think. I never had a problem with it, frankly. It seemed always quite obvious to me that photons move in a straight line, little tiny discrete bits. and it has a frequency. So bullets can have a frequency. Lots of things have a frequency. The bullets aren't tied to each other. There's not a rope between the first bullet I shoot and the second bullet I shoot. If I throw some rocks at a stick and you know, try to knock the stick over, I know the rocks aren't connected in any way whatsoever.
But there cannot be a duality in nature. It's completely impossible. It's antithetical to logic and wisdom. But most scientists don't.
So that's how he explains the double slit experiment. So this is big ending of his explanation of the double slit experiment, is to say there's no wave particle duality. That doesn't explain the double slit experiment. Sorry, Ken.
Have any wisdom. They're all atomists, by the way.
Okay, and so he calls them atomists when everybody knows the Young drawing doesn't have any atoms in it. So again, it's just more horse shit. Obviously, physics is arguing the same kind of mush as you. They believe in some sort of wave in some sort of field of some sort of mush. So why even... They're all atomists, by the way. Well, not really. Okay, show us their atom. Show us their atom with positrons and neutrinos in it. Show us the diagram of the atom.
So, anyway, there's the very simplex yet long-winded explanation of the dual slit experiment.
Okay, it wasn't simple. It didn't have any information. No, zero content. Absolute waste of time. 19 minutes of absolutely rambling, babbling bullshit. I mean, worse than religion. It's actually worse, right? You could read some story out of the Bible and it'll have some kind of coherent thing, like the prodigal son or something, or the sheep master who didn't work hard enough to save the silly sheep or whatever, the black sheep. It's worth as many as the... No, it really isn't. So that's kind of a silly story. Lots of silly stories. I mean, people inside of whales and all kinds of other kind of crap, and you know, extortion to kill your own son if you love me. I mean, there's lots of silly stories, but they have some coherency to them. I mean, people do walk on the flat earth. You know, there's something, but you know, you're not even touching anything that makes any sense. You're just talking fairy platypuses and gremlins and hobgoblins. There's nothing real in any of your physics.
Peace out, Girl Scout.
And it's a little faggoty. So anyway, God, this planet is just such a piece of pile of shit. It's just covered in shit. The worst shit is called human. The human shit. Ugh. I don't know. I have to endeavor to persevere, Gary. Alright, I'm trying. But it's not easy. So anyway, this has been another Draft Science video presentation. For what purpose, though? Just talking to people with fat in their ears. Ugh. Anyway, till the next time and such. Yay.